The streets of Glasgow were silent, not the peaceful silence of a sleeping city, but the tense, suffocating silence that comes just before violence. Torches flickered along the city walls, casting long shadows on cold stone. Beneath them, English soldiers marched, their armor clanking in rhythm, eyes scanning the dark corners of a city they thought they controlled. Inside those walls, somewhere in hiding, was a man the English feared more than any army, William Wallace. To the English, he was an outlaw, a criminal, a rebel leader who had killed their sheriff, burned their outposts, and inspired unrest among the Scots. To many Scots, he was something more, a symbol. But symbols don't always survive, and tonight it seemed certain Wallace wouldn't, because he was trapped, and he knew it. But this wasn't the first time Wallace had faced death, and it wouldn't be the last. Let's rewind. Scotland, 1297. A land under occupation. The English king, Edward I, known as Longshanks, had invaded the year before, taking advantage of Scotland's lack of leadership after its king died without an heir. What followed was a brutal conquest. Scottish castles fell. Nobles were forced to swear loyalty. Common people bore the weight of foreign rule. For those who resisted, the punishment was swift and final. And yet, from the chaos, a resistance began to grow. It didn't start with armies or noble houses. It started with small bands of men, guerrilla fighters, determined, desperate. At their head was William Wallace. Born into minor nobility, Wallace wasn't destined for fame, but destiny, as it turns out, doesn't care where you're born. Some say Wallace's rebellion began after the English killed his wife. Others say it was his father or brother. The truth is lost to time, but one thing is clear. Wallace had a reason to fight, and in 1297, he did. At Lanark, Wallace led a daring raid against the English sheriff, killing him and freeing Scottish prisoners. That single act turned Wallace from a local nuisance into England's most wanted man. A bounty was placed on his head. Troops were sent to hunt him down. Wallace responded with more raids, striking at English patrols, stealing weapons, gaining support. His reputation grew, not just as a warrior, but as a leader, a symbol of defiance, and that's what brought him to Glasgow. Word reached Wallace that sympathetic Scottish nobles in Glasgow wanted to meet. They offered men, arms, and safe haven. Wallace was cautious, but the opportunity was too great to ignore. He entered the city with a small group of trusted men, moving under the cover of darkness. Glasgow, at that time, was a vital English stronghold, a city under heavy watch, filled with English garrisons. Wallace knew the risks. What he didn't know was that it was a trap. The meeting had been a lie. The nobles had betrayed him, perhaps out of fear, perhaps for gold. It didn't matter. What mattered was that the English knew Wallace was in the city. They surrounded it. 300 soldiers, heavily armed, trained. The city gates were sealed, the exits blocked. Wallace and his men were cornered. No reinforcements, no escape route. The English commander wanted him alive. He ordered his men not to kill Wallace, but to capture him and break him publicly. They thought they had him, but Wallace wasn't ready to be broken. Inside a small, dark room near the city's edge, Wallace gathered his men. They were tired, outnumbered 30-1. But Wallace didn't speak of death. He didn't speak of surrender. He spoke of escape. It sounded impossible, but impossible was something Wallace understood. He had a plan, and it required precision and nerve. First, they moved quietly through the alleys, avoiding patrols, sticking to the shadows. They reached a small English outpost near the wall. 2 guards stood watch. Wallace and his men struck silently. Quick, brutal. The guards fell without a sound. Wallace took the armor from one of them, the cloak, the helmet, the insignia. His men did the same. Dressed in English garb, they blended into the night, but that was just the first step. Next came the diversion. Wallace knew that confusion was more powerful than steel. They lit torches and set fire to the English supply wagons, carefully, methodically. Within minutes, flames rose high into the sky. Panic spread through the English camp. Soldiers shouted, ran, tried to form ranks, but had no idea what was happening. In the chaos, Wallace marched, disguised as an English officer, giving orders, moving freely. No one questioned him. And then, with perfect timing, he and his men slipped out through the gate, past the guards, past the torches, past the very soldiers who were trying to capture him. By dawn, the fires had burned out. The English commander surveyed the wreckage, supplies destroyed, men injured, and no Wallace. He had vanished, gone, escaped. The English were humiliated. But Scotland was electrified. Word spread quickly. In taverns, in churches, in marketplaces, people spoke of Wallace's escape, of the man who had tricked the English, defied them, walked through their army and lived. The legend of William Wallace grew, and so did his army. Men from all walks of life joined him, peasants, soldiers, nobles. Within months, he led a full rebellion. And later, that same year, Wallace would defeat the English at Stirling Bridge, a battle that proved Scotland would not be broken. But none of that would have happened if Wallace hadn't escaped Glasgow. That one night, outnumbered, betrayed, surrounded, he didn't surrender. He didn't die, he escaped, not with brute force, but with daring, with cunning, with courage. That's how legends are made. And that is how William Wallace became Braveheart. But the story doesn't end there. After Glasgow, Wallace became a leader not only of rebels, but of the national consciousness. He appealed to the hearts of ordinary Scots, who had grown tired of being ruled by foreign soldiers and distant kings. He moved through the countryside, gaining not only men, but support from villages who had once lived in fear. He taught them to fight with what they had, to strike where the English were weak, to disappear into the hills before they could be caught. His tactics changed the war. He refused to fight on the enemy's terms. He used the terrain, the forests, and the knowledge of his people. His growing army harassed English supply lines, isolated garrisons, and weakened morale. More importantly, he inspired others to rise. The English couldn't ignore him. They called him a terrorist, a criminal, but they feared him. In England, Wallace became a name whispered in court, a problem King Edward had to solve. Troops were doubled, rewards were offered, yet Wallace kept moving, kept fighting. The escape from Glasgow wasn't just survival, it was transformation. That night, Wallace didn't just slip through enemy lines, he became something bigger. He became hope. And in a time when hope was rare, that was the most dangerous weapon of all. If you liked this story, hit like and subscribe for more forgotten history. And tell us, what legendary escape should we cover next? Thanks for watching. Stay curious.